to the House. Thank you.
Sir William Seo.
Mr. Speaker, it's said that consumer legislation is an important contributor to building consumer confidence and ensuring that successful consumers are participating successfully in our marketplace. And that as consumers feel that confidence and are able to interact in the marketplace, they are then able to contribute to a more productive and innovative economy, whether it be that they are dealing with goods and services. So that's the basis for why we need to have good consumer legislation. And I have to say, sir, that this government has failed on so many fronts to be able to provide that confidence to our communities. Well, let me just give the other side some examples. This government has presided over the worst economic period ever. They have presided over the worst economic record in 50 years. The doubling of unemployment since 2008. The increasing numbers of Kiwis that have migrated to Australia. One way, sir. And we have a continual number, sir, about 40% as recently released, of people working harder and longer but still have to face poverty, sir. So, you know, that, sir, is the result of this government failing to provide consumer protection, failing to provide confidence to the consumers throughout New Zealand. And I think, sir, that in the last 5 years under this government, that our communities, New Zealanders from the far north to the deep south, have continually been screaming at this government, and rightfully so, demanding from this lot that they honour their promises made, sir. Their promises about mana-enhancing legislation. Their promises of creating 170,000 jobs. Their promises of providing a brighter future for all New Zealanders, they said. Well, sadly, sir, those demands, those calls from our communities, the calls for jobs, the calls for living income, the call for affordable homes, the calls for a better quality of life for all have seriously fallen on deaf ears. That's because the people's issues, New Zealanders' issues, have not been the priority for this government. Their priority have always been big business, their mates, crony capitalism is what my colleague here has said, who have demanded of this government, their big business mates, free, unbridled growth and profits. And this government have not put people, sir, as their priority, not put the quality of living for all our citizens. And they continue to look after themselves and their mates at the expense of Kiwis. And they've stopped listening to New Zealanders. They've become arrogant and out of touch. So, look, an example is really the series of bills that we are now debating at its third reading. The protection of consumers since this government came into power have not been their priority. In fact, sir, they've sat on this legislation for a very long time. In fact, from the beginning. What they did, though, sir, in the beginning was to raise these legislation and attempt to pacify the calls from our community for better protection. And they've gone through, but look, the facts remain, sir. They've gone through several ministers of consumer affairs to get to this particular point. And by my own accounting, sir, by my own calculation, they've had 5 ministers of consumer affairs, a minister every year. That, sir, is an indication that the consumer affairs portfolio has never been the priority for this government. So, yep, it is about time that they brought this legislation to the House, sir. But sadly, sir, for many of the consumers who had huge expectations of this government right from the start, they are quite sorely sad by just the way that they've taken their time as an indication that the protection of consumers, giving consumers the confidence in the marketplace, has never been their priority from get-go. Their priority, sir, has always been their big business mates. And whilst my colleagues who have been on the committee are saying that we do need to support this, that there are some good things in the series of legislation that is before the House, I suspect, sir, that the truth of how these legislation provides protection or not to our citizens will depend on how those citizens receive these pieces of legislation. Let me remind the House, sir, that very recently this week, there have been numerous reports, and I want to share with the House one report titled "Loan Sharks Rob Desperate Kiwis." It says the head of the country's biggest credit union has taken a swipe at loan sharks, who he says are carrying out legitimised robbery of unsuspecting clients. Mr. Gavin Earl, the chief executive of NCCU Baywhite, said loan sharks were causing despair among the vulnerable, the desperate and unwary in our community. Mr. Earl, who is based in Hastings, said one lender was openly advertising a daily interest rate of 1.3% per day. That doesn't sound like much, but that equates to an actual rate of 475% per annum. And even worse, should you default on your repayments, you're hit with an additional penalty rate of 75% per annum. Those rates, Sir, Mr. Earl says, are fantastic if you're the lender, but crippling if you're the borrower. And I don't know, sir, whether this piece of legislation is going to give confidence to our consumers, to our communities, particularly leading up to the Christmas period, where there is protection. And so some on the other side, I don't know, will hopefully be able to recognise that there are some serious problems that were raised by the community from day one, 2008. And I don't know, but if they were genuine and serious about taking the consumer rights and the consumer protection seriously, then hopefully that their piece of legislation is going to provide some of that protection as raised by Mr. Gavin Earl of the New Zealand Credit Union. A woman from Whangarei who got 4,000 of electrical equipment on credit in 2009 has since paid more than 12,000 for the goods, and she still owes about 2,700. This is an example of how people are getting themselves into debt and has seen a huge increase in demand for budgeting services, not just in Whangarei, but right through the length and breadth of this country of ours. I have to say, sir, constantly we have these stories, and the government has heard these stories from 2008, 2009. The community will have every right to question whether the pieces of legislation that they put before this House today is going to provide the kinds of protection as raised by this particular report and provide confidence to our citizens out in the wider community. May I just finish off, sir, by saying the other side laughed when I said that in the last 5 years things have worsened for many, many communities. And I want to say to them that the inequality has worsened, and they have presided over that worsening period of people who have no choice, who are forced to try and make some of the most difficult decisions on the meagre incomes that they are earning, because that's just not available to them through their lack of knowledge, through their lack of resources, through their lack of jobs, through lack of income, sir. And it has been, and I would point the finger directly at their government. That's the government responsible for the struggles that communities are encountering today, sir.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it.
Fair Trading Amendment Bill, third reading. Consumer Guarantees Amendment Bill, third reading. Weights and Measures Amendment Bill, third reading. Second-hand Dealers and Pawnbrokers Amendment Bill, third reading. Carriage of Goods Amendment Bill, third reading. Auctioneers Bill, third reading.
Call on Government Orders of the Day numbers 10 and 11.